By the late 50s, Rover's gas turbine department was working flat out in the race to create the first production jet car. For people like Cecil Bedford, time was of the essence. By day, Cecil was a draftsman, but at night he worked on in the back room of his bungalow. Armed only with newspaper and paste, Cecil was one of the turbine team's secret weapons.
Well, what I'm doing at the moment, I'm covering this plastic mould, putting these strips on, giving them good soakings. It's quite a time-consuming process, but with the shortage of materials at the time we were doing this, this was the best we could think of doing.
Cecil created scale models of all the major engine parts, making a vital difference to those who designed them.
You could see it in 3D, and don't forget, in those days we hadn't got computers that would show you a shape and twist it round and show you what it was all about. We physically had to make a model and look at it. I probably worked from 7 o'clock at night till 1 or 2 in the morning. And then overnight these would dry out, and I'd load them into my car in the morning and be over at Solihull for 7:30. I can never remember when there wasn't an urgency. It was always very important and wanted yesterday. Because if you think about it, we were all treading new ground. What I was doing was in me, it was in us all. We'd got this new project, it had got to work. And by Jove, we were all there, determined to see that it would work.
1960 saw the culmination of 15 years gas turbine work. T4 was Rover's make-or-break jet car, and the first real attempt at a road version. The engine was by far the most efficient jet, with a fuel consumption of nearly 20 miles a gallon. In April 1962, Maurice Wilkes took the car to America to show it off at the New York Motor Show. But even as they prepared to leave, the Chrysler Corporation was building 50 gas turbine cars for customers. Rover's once unassailable lead had evaporated.
For 15, 20 years, I worked like a slave, and yet I knew somebody had actually stopped marked to say, when are you going to have a gas turbine car? I'd say, well, I think probably not.
Ultimately, it was not the competition that killed Rover's gas turbine car. Fuel consumption was still unacceptably high, and even conservative estimates put the cost of manufacture at over twice that of Rover's top-of-the-range piston car. While the engineers licked their wounds, they took consolation in the one aspect of T4 that was an unequivocal success: its shape. Unbeknown to the public, the T4 was a test bed for the company's next production car. A daring project that would redefine the Rover name. Spen King had recently moved across from gas turbines to take over Rover's new car programme, bringing with him some of the jet car's spirit of adventure.
In those days, the British industry was criticised for being non-adventurous. They said all the people who were keen on cars were saying all the interesting motor cars come from Europe, you know. P6 reflected a little bit that sort of background.
Good day, sir. Oh, yes, they are expecting you.
One thing was for sure: this new car would be drastically different from its predecessors. But the path of its development was rather more nerve-wracking than this glossy marketing film would have us believe.
No, there was a long period of time when the company said, what can we possibly do? And then it became a feeling that maybe we could make a lighter, cheaper motor car. And I remember it being referred to as selling our birthright. And eventually came out of all this the idea to make it new all the way through, so that everything could be correspondingly light. An obvious way of making the thing lighter was to get rid of the chassis frame and have a unit construction vehicle. And we didn't really know anything about making unit construction vehicles refined. So when we got the first prototypes, they were really pretty awful. They had a terrible problem with road noise. They were deafeningly loud. And here you are, sitting inside a big tin structure, which if you ting it here, you can hear it very easily in the back.
For a company that prided itself on quiet motor cars, this was potentially a disaster.
A lot of the noise transmission was through the rear axle mounting to the body. And so we finished up softening this bush. We did that on a Saturday morning, found out what bits were available off the shelf, went to the track on the Monday morning and went into production and stayed that way forevermore.
As the deadline for launch approached, the engineers understood that there was only so much they could do.
What usually happens is that you're always told it's too late to do that size of change, and then something else holds the programme.
And you could have done it all the time.
You could have done it, and then you kick yourself for the next 15 years.
There are always faults there. I mean, now you could take a P6 and criticise it all over the place. And
yes.
If we went on working on it, we could improve it too.
In the summer of '63, the car was finally wrestled away from the engineers and put into production. All that remained was for it to be sold.
The P6, or rather the Rover 2000, as it'll be called when the secrecy surrounding its development is over, is a long, low, sleek piece of luxury and precision. It's a zippy light saloon. You know, the go-ahead sort of people for whom this car was tailor-made. Modern-minded people who are used to quality engineering. Discerning people with a bit of dash, who are really going places.
Someone definitely going places was fighter pilot Brian Payne. When he took a ground commission in the mid-60s, he was forced to get his thrills a little closer to Earth.
Flying was great fun. I'd rather have kept doing it. But my other interest always had been motor cars. The Rover 2000 was something of a revelation. It was, to my mind, far ahead of its time.
Since buying his first 2000 in 1968, Brian has rarely been without a P6. His 3.5-litre V8 is considered the ultimate, but even the modestly powered 2-litre version was enough to hook the young flight lieutenant.
Quite frankly, I wanted an exciting car, and there weren't very many exciting cars around. I remember it created an enormous stir at the time, because until then, Rovers had produced fairly staid, very dignified, high-quality motor cars. And the 2000 was totally out of character. It was more of a high-performance sporting saloon. To me, it was a disaster when the 70-mile-an-hour speed limit arrived. Until then, I literally used 100 as a cruising speed. I can still remember a phrase at the beginning of the handbook. It said, when driving continuously at speeds above 105 miles an hour, inflate the tyres to 36 pounds per square inch all round. And that was in a car with a top speed of perhaps 108. So in short, they fully expected you to use its performance.
As a small company, Rover could ill afford failure. But in people like Brian, there was a ready-made market. The car was an instant success, winning rave reviews and the very first Car of the Year award.
It was originally planned for building 350 a week, I think.
Yes.
And I think that throughout most of its life, which was total 13 years or something like that, the build was over 700.
And occasionally hit 1,000 a week.
I didn't know we'd succeeded in P6 until we found we had a huge loyalty of customers who bought the first one and came back and bought another one. I knew we won them.
The P6 was Rover's most successful car ever, but it also marked the end of an era. In 1967, the British Leyland Corporation moved in, and in the process, a legacy of distinctive British engineering was lost forever.